Hello and welcome to Preparing to Write Your Thesis. My name is Sam Byers and I'm a researcher developer within the Researcher Development Programme. I focus primarily on training life science graduates because life science is my background. I did my PhD a number of years ago in molecular endocrinology and then moved on to do 2 postdocs at the Royal Veterinary College, again in molecular endocrinology. Before we get started, I'd just like to go through what we're not going to cover today. So we're not going to be looking at anything associated with the submission of your thesis. We're not going to be looking at any paperwork, abstract submissions, deadlines for submitting your thesis, or extensions, which you may have questions about given the current climate. For more information about these, I strongly suggest that you speak to your departmental graduate administration team or your Director of Graduate Studies. What we are going to look at today is the writing process. I'd like to take some time just to remind you about the writing process and the steps within it. We'll be going through thesis planning techniques. We're going to be looking at how we can establish productivity so that we can get our thesis written, we can get it submitted, and we can have that champagne outside those yellow doors once it's been submitted. We're also going to be looking at techniques to overcome writer's block. I'm going to remind you about the steps that need to be taken in order to establish a productive writing regime so that you can become a productive writer and get your thesis written. We're going to go through some tips and tools on how to avoid procrastination, as well as looking at things that could cause potential problems such as plagiarism and copyright. I would just like to recommend a book to you, How to Write a Thesis by Rowena Murray. This is an excellent book with more tips and tricks on how to write your thesis, get it written and get your message across within your thesis. This is about £20 on Amazon. It's part of a series which Rowena has written, which also include how to prepare for your Viva and how to write a paper for publication. Right, so let's begin. Let's remind ourselves about the writing process. There are a number of steps to the writing process, and we're going to start right at the beginning in the incubation phase. So this is the first part of the writing process, which the majority of you are already in. Okay, so this is where you're doing your research, you're collecting your data, you're thinking about how your data fits together, how that's going to fit perhaps within a chapter, how it fits within the broader context of the discipline that you're working in. I strongly recommend some post-it notes, particularly by the side of your bed, because that is usually, particularly when you're writing your thesis, when you have those eureka moments. Having post-it notes by the side of your bed means that you can write those ideas, those eureka moments down, go and have a wonderful night's sleep, and then pick them up the following morning. Also in the incubation phase, you're going to be checking deadlines, checking guidelines, formatting requirements, etc., etc. Once we've done that, we then move into the planning phase where we start brainstorming our beautiful thesis. We're going to start putting that skeletal structure down, mapping out those chapters, those subheadings that are going to go into those chapters. And once we've done that, we then move into the drafting phase where we write our first bit of text. We write that first draft of our gorgeous thesis. And at this point, at the end of the drafting phase, I would strongly recommend having a little break to celebrate that you have actually written your first draft. This is a really big point in the process of writing your thesis. After you've done that, you're going to move into the redrafting phase where you're perhaps going to draft, redraft and redraft. You may think, oh, is there ever going to be any light at the end of this tunnel? Trust me, there will be. But during this redrafting phase, you're going to be refining sentences, you're going to be looking at your word choice and perhaps restructuring a little bit, perhaps if your message isn't coming across. Once we've redrafted, we're then going to go into our presentation phase where we're going to be checking our format. We're going to check that our grammar is good, and we're also going to be doing our spelling check to make sure that we eliminate all of those spelling mistakes. Okay, so you might do the glorious spell check perhaps once, twice or 3 times. Once we've done that, it's ready for publication. It's ready to be submitted for the examiners to read that finished piece in preparation for your Viva. Yay! We're there, we've done it, celebration time. It's all very well looking at the writing process. It can feel very overwhelming when you start to get into that position where you're actually going to have to write your thesis, and this is where writing plans can be really helpful. Now, before I put this presentation together, I went to a few of my dear old friends who have written theses, and I asked them if there was any bits of knowledge that they would like to pass on to you that are listening to this presentation today. And here are just a couple of them. So my friend Daniela says start writing as soon as possible. And another friend of mine, Jordan, strongly recommends making a writing timetable with your supervisor and trying really hard to keep to it. Now, Jordan was very good at doing this, and she managed to write her thesis and get submitted within 3 years. So what do writing plans look like? There are a number of ways in which you can write a writing plan. The first one is a Gantt chart. So you will have your start deadline from when you're going to start writing your thesis, and at the other end of your Gantt chart you're going to have your submission deadline. And in between you're going to have week blocks. Okay? And as you can see in this figure here, you can then start mapping out where you're going to have different bits completed, when you're going to get your supervisor to review your work, when you're going to do those important edits, and you can see how it all fits from start to finish. Another way of writing a thesis plan is to do a day-to-day timetable. Now, this is an example of my day-to-day timetable that I did when I was writing my thesis. I would like to say that this is a very extreme day-to-day timetable. I would not recommend working until 10:30 every night. Okay, unfortunately there were circumstances which meant I had to do that. I'm hoping that you will not be in that situation, and I strongly recommend, if you are going to use a day-to-day timetable, that you go within working hours, so 9 to 5, and you also include breaks. Okay, so Saturdays and Sundays being break days. But as you can see from this, what you do is you break your days up into chunks, and then you write what it is you're going to do in those chunks. You also need to include breaks in that as well, because we can't work all the time. We need to have breaks, otherwise we will burn ourselves out. Another way of writing a thesis plan is to write SMART objectives. Okay, so what are the goals that you want to achieve? How are you going to measure them? How will you know that they're finished? Are they realistic? Have you agreed these goals with your supervisor? Are the goals that you want and have set relevant? Are they essential to your thesis getting written, or are they nice to haves? Okay, and when is it going to be done? So you're setting yourself a time limit for them. There's also the implementation intention table, where you list the tasks that need to be completed. You write your feelings towards them, whether they're good, bad or indifferent. Acknowledging your feelings is a really important thing to do, because it allows you to move on and get things done. Once we've acknowledged our feelings, we then start to think about when we're going to do it. So we start sticking dates to it, to each of these tasks. We then think about where we're going to do it. This might be, you might think that, oh, well, I'm going to be writing at home, so that's pretty obvious. But actually, it's important, if you are writing at home, which a lot of you will be in that position now, given the current circumstances, it's important to make sure that you have space within your home that isn't associated with work. So under that where are you going to write? Are you going to write on the dining room table, so that your living room, your bedroom, your kitchen are not associated with work? Okay, once you've thought about where you're going to write it, how are you going to do it? Are you going to start by doing storyboards? Are you going to start doing mind maps? Are you just going to get in there, get stuck in and start writing it on a laptop? Okay, how are you going to do it? And when are the deadlines for these tasks? Okay, the most important part of this table, which is my favourite part of this table, is what reward are you going to give yourself for completing the task? Okay, so that might be going for perhaps a run, having your favourite bar of chocolate, having your favourite tipple, perhaps having a cup of tea, perhaps FaceTiming a friend, perhaps joining in one of the house party events that you've been invited to. By listing your reward, you can see what is going to happen once you've finished, and because it's nice and good and it's going to make you feel warm and fuzzy inside, you're more likely to complete that task. Okay, so this is the first activity within this presentation. What I would like you to do is pick one of the 4 planning techniques that we've been through, and I'd like you to spend perhaps the next 10 to 15 minutes making your writing plan. Okay, so it's important to pause here. Take 10 minutes, pick one of these writing plans and start making your plan. If everybody's happy with this, off you go. Okay, I hope you found that activity useful. It may be that you haven't finished making your writing plan. That's okay. That's something that you can do once you've finished listening to this presentation. Okay? We're now going to look at how we can establish productivity so that we can get our thesis written. One technique is using a storyboard. Now, you will have been doing a lot of wonderful, amazing, interesting research over the past couple of years, and you will have a wealth of data. Okay, but how are we going to make that into a story that gives a nice clear message to our reader, to our examiners? And storyboards can be a really useful way of doing this. Here's an example. Okay, so this is data from my thesis from my first results chapter, and as you can see, using storyboards allowed me to put my figures into a nice series, and underneath those figures there are lines which allowed me to write some developmental notes. Okay, so that I could write down what it is that figure was saying and how that's going to lead on to the next figure, and building up my message within that chapter. Another useful technique is mind maps. This is really useful for introductions. This is an example of an introduction to my thesis. Okay, so here you can see that I wanted to talk about parathyroids. My thesis was about parathyroid development. Okay, you can see that I had to talk about function, development, structure, transcription factors, how that led quite nicely on to a section about transcription factors and signaling molecules. I had to talk about parathyroid-related disorders because that was ultimately what my thesis was about, and you can see how that was linking to other parts of my introduction. The good thing about mind maps is it's visual, so it allows you to see where different sections are going to be linking with one another. The other good thing about mind maps, because they're visual, is because you can put a nice big tick on the things that you've written, so they can be quite nice to help you track your progress in a nice visual format. Another technique is writing in layers. Okay, it may be that you're in a position at the moment where you can't dedicate all of your time to writing for whatever reason. Writing to layers acknowledges this and allows you to develop your thesis, to progress with your thesis writing in a step-by-step fashion. This is a concept which was developed by Rowena Murray, and it is in more depth in how to write a thesis. But ultimately, it starts with layer 1. This is where you outline your thesis. So you write what your chapter headings are going to be. Underneath those chapter headings, you write 1 or 2 sentences which covers the contents of that chapter, such as its purpose. Okay, what is the message you want to get across? It may be when you're writing your chapter headings that you feel you need to have additional section headings within your chapter. And again, in layer 1, this is where we write those headings, and again writing developmental notes, a couple of sentences on what it is that's going to be covered in those sections. What is that main message? So if you were to go away and then come back, you'd be able to progress on to layer 2, which is looking at paragraph outlines. This is where you're going to be writing a list of points on what you want to cover in those sections. Once you've written your list of points, you might want to review them to check that you haven't perhaps repeated yourself. You want to make sure that each point is going to be important and lead on to the next one to help build up that story. Okay, so this is a really good opportunity for you to check, are your paragraphs going to be in the right order, and you can take some time in this layer 2 to just rearrange the order that perhaps you'll write those paragraphs. So if you were going to go away and come back, you then move on to layer 3, where you're actually going to write your paragraphs. You're going to write what the main point of your paragraph is. How are you going to illustrate that? Perhaps you might be using examples from work that you've already done, particularly if you're writing your results sections. If perhaps you're writing paragraphs for your introduction, you'll be drawing on evidence that you've gathered from your literature reviews. This is where you'll start to formulate that and put it all together in this layer 3. Our next activity, again, I'd like you to allow yourself 10 to 15 minutes to do this. I'd like you to pick one of the 3 techniques that we've just been through, so storyboarding, writing in layers, or mind mapping. I would like you to start mapping out your thesis or a thesis chapter using one of these techniques. If everybody's happy with that, 10 to 15 minutes, off you go. Okay, so again, I hope you found that exercise useful. Don't worry if you haven't finished it, it's something that you can go back to once this presentation has finished. So we're now moving on to productive writing habit. Moxley and Taylor say that in order to become a productive writer, it's a 4-step approach. First of all, you need to establish momentum, and I really hope that listening to my delightful voice has helped kickstart that momentum for you. Once you've established your momentum, we need to think about how we can develop a regime so we can write regularly. So take some time after this presentation to look at your timetable and see where you can fit writing into it. Okay? Once we've established a regular writing regime, we need to think about how we're going to feel comfortable when we're writing, because when we're comfortable, we're all nice, warm and fuzzy. That's going to make us want to actually write. Okay, so if you need to have a 2-litre bottle of Coke next to you, a pint of coffee, 2 litres of water, you need to have all the lights on in the house, you need to have Radio 1 blaring, you need to write in your pyjamas, whatever. If it makes you comfortable, do it, because you will be a lot happier and a lot less anxious when you're writing your thesis. Some of you may feel a little bit anxious about writing on your own. Unfortunately, this is something that perhaps isn't what you planned to do when you were writing your thesis. You were perhaps thinking about writing in your open plan office, perhaps in your lab, but given the current circumstances, we're having to work from home. There are ways in which you can still maintain an element of social skills, for want of a better phrase, whilst you're writing. Perhaps have a chat with some colleagues, perhaps think about using Teams or perhaps Zoom or perhaps House Party, maybe even Messenger, with a few of your friends to have that social element so that you can have a virtual writing group. Okay? What distracts us from writing? There may be a whole host of reasons for this. I'd like to share some of mine that stopped me from writing when I was writing my thesis. The kitchen and the bathroom that I had when I was writing my thesis was the cleanest. Ultimately, all of these excuses, all of these habits, these things that we do are examples of procrastination, perhaps examples of blank page syndrome, and examples of writer's block. Now, as I said to you before, I asked some friends of mine who had written their thesis if there were things that they wanted to pass on to you, and here are just a few more quotes from a few of my friends. So Carla says sometimes you just have to get something written, even if it's absolute tripe. Carla is absolutely right there. Charlotte, you don't need to start at the beginning. Very true. You don't need to start with your introduction. Perhaps start with the materials and methods. It is the dullest chapter you are going to write. Get it over and done with. Yeah, then perhaps do your results, write your discussion, and then go back to your introduction. Okay? Also, Charlotte was saying, write the first page, you can always delete it. Yeah, no one need ever see it. That's absolutely true. Just get something written on paper or on the screen so that you've got something to work with. And a good friend of mine, Alex, sometimes if the words just aren't flowing, a good glass of wine will help them flow. Okay? Here are some techniques which I'd like to go through with you in order to help you move on from distraction, from procrastination, from writer's block, from blank page syndrome. Free writing. So a few of you may well be familiar with this concept of free writing. This is where you allow yourself 5 minutes to answer a question. I would like you to engage with this activity, so I would like you to set a timer for 5 minutes, and I would like you to free write. And when I mean free write, in sentences, just write whatever comes into your head onto paper, okay? I would like you to free write your answer to the following question. How does my work fit into the wider field of knowledge in my research area? Okay, if everyone's happy with that, 5 minutes, free writing, off you go. I hope you found that activity useful. It is a really good tool if we're suffering from blank page syndrome. The work that you have just written is not going to be perfect. You are going to have to redraft it, but at least it's a start. Okay? The second technique that I'd like you to engage with is writing to prompts. Again, you may be familiar with this concept, but what I would like you to do is allow yourself 10 minutes to write 50 words to each of these prompts. What work has been done in this area? What is your research question? What work did you do? What did you find? What does this mean? What do you intend to do next? So 50 words, full sentences, don't worry about referencing. 10 minutes, 50 words to each of those prompts, off you go. Here are just a few other useful prompts that you might find useful, particularly when you're coming to write your introduction, that literature review. These again can be found in Rowena Murray's How to Write a Thesis, but these are very good questions to just help the juices flow if we're a little bit stuck when we're writing our introduction. Why is this subject important? Who else thinks this subject is important? Who's worked on this subject before? What has been done? Who has done something similar? What are the gaps? How does my work relate to the literature? The final technique that I'd like to go through with you are some procrastination prevention techniques. So we've got a number of blocking devices that we can use. So you've got rescue time. This allows you to log how long you spend on particular web pages and apps, etc. You have Freedom 2, which is an internet app blocker. So this will block the internet, block those apps that you perhaps might procrastinate on a little bit. Facebook perhaps, Twitter, Instagram, maybe even TikTok these days. I'm so cool, yes, I know about TikTok. Okay, and you also have another website called Stick. Now this is a website where you stick your goals into the web page. You can optionally put money into that, or you can nominate a referee to receive an email. So this might be your supervisor, for example. If you achieve your goal, you'll get your money back, or your supervisor will get an email saying, yay, he or she or they have completed their task. Your supervisor then might give you a phone call and go, good on you. Yeah, it's always nice to get a pat on the back from your supervisor. Equally though, if you don't meet your goal, your money will go to charity, and your supervisor will get an email saying that you haven't achieved your goal. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. This might be a really good opportunity for you to perhaps have a chat with your supervisor to discuss why that goal hadn't been met. We've got the Pomodoro technique as well. This is where you set yourself a timer for 25 minutes, for example. You work on your task until the timer rings, and then you take a 3 to 5 minute break. After that, you then resume another 25-minute Pomodoro block, and you repeat 4 Pomodoros in a row, taking a longer break after that 4th Pomodoro, okay, of perhaps an hour or 2. There's also the prioritizing table. If it's important and urgent, i.e. writing your thesis, you got to do it. If it's important but it's not urgent, perhaps writing a paper, you can defer it till after you've written your thesis. If it's not important but it's urgent, we can think about delegating, perhaps delegating to other PhD students in the lab, perhaps to other postdocs, or perhaps going back to your supervisor and seeing how that work can be delegated out, or could it be deferred. And if it's not important, it's not urgent, dump it, stick it in the dump pile, walk away and forget about it. Okay. So now we're moving on to how we're going to review our work. You are the most important person who is going to review your work, okay? But you must do it after you've had a break. And I don't mean a 5-minute toilet break, I mean a substantial break. So you finish writing your work, take a break from it for an hour or 2, okay? Maybe even longer, okay? Because you are the one that's most likely to spot the things that needs changing, but with a 60,000 word document, that is not going to happen after a 5-minute break, okay? You will become word blind. Somebody recommended to me another way to spot mistakes is to read things backwards as well. So take that break and think about reading your work backwards as well. Your colleagues in your lab are going to be a really good source of review too. Okay, they are at the end of the day experts in the techniques and materials that you've been using. Peers in other labs, okay, can be really useful too. They'll be able to give you some really good advice on are you getting your message across effectively and concisely. And finally, your supervisor. They're going to be a really useful source of feedback for you when it comes to writing your thesis. If you haven't already, sit down and make a plan with your supervisor on how your work is going to be reviewed. Are they going to review your thesis chapter by chapter? By that I mean, are they going to read a chapter, and while they're reading a chapter you're going to write another one, okay? Or do they want to see your thesis in its entirety? It's important to establish how your work is going to be reviewed with your supervisor so that tensions don't occur when you're writing. And I also strongly recommend keeping an open dialogue with your supervisor while you're writing, okay? So perhaps dropping them an email a couple of times a week, perhaps with Teams, giving them a video call every couple of days, or perhaps once a week if they're very busy, just so that they can see that you're okay. It's really important to keep that open dialogue with them because they are busy, and if they don't hear from you, that doesn't necessarily flag up to them that there may be something wrong. Okay, it's not because they don't care, but especially given these current circumstances, there's an awful lot of things that are going on, and if people don't say anything, then sometimes they slip through the cracks. So keep an open dialogue with your supervisor. I just want to touch on a few things that we really do need to think about to avoid making costly mistakes when we're writing our thesis. Problem words. You're writing a big document, 60,000 words, that's a lot of words, okay? And it may be that there is a word that, even though you know how to spell it, you may just inadvertently misspell it when you're writing your thesis. This can happen. There's nothing to be ashamed about. You're writing your thesis to a deadline. There's an awful lot of stress, an awful lot of anxiety with writing your thesis, finding perhaps your next position, the whole coronavirus situation that we're in, okay? If you do find that you're having problem spelling words, I knew how to spell fluorescence when I was writing my thesis, but somehow managed to get the O and the U mixed up. And it wasn't until my supervisor told me that I was getting this mixed up, that I realised I had a problem. And in order to overcome that, again, I went back to trusty old post-it notes. I wrote fluorescence out on a post-it note. I stuck it to my screen of my PC, and when I came to write fluorescence and I wrote that word a lot, I would stop and I would type it out letter by letter, like a toddler does when they're learning to write. Learning to write. There you go. That's showing my age, isn't it? Learning to type. Plagiarism. Plagiarism is something that we don't intentionally do, but sometimes we can get caught up. Sometimes we can inadvertently plagiarize things. Okay, particularly if we've written papers, we can perhaps fall foul to self-plagiarism. Again, you're at the stage in your academic career where this isn't going to be intentional, but it is something we still need to be mindful of. Okay, plagiarism is poor scholarship and a breach of academic integrity. For more information about this, please use the website that is highlighted in this slide. This is the Cambridge Plagiarism website. Copyright is also another thing that we really need to be mindful of, particularly if we are using papers which we may have written ourselves, or perhaps we want to perhaps use figures from other papers that have been published by others. We need to be mindful of copyright, and here are two web links to the Office of Scholarly Communication which go through copyright for hardbound theses and also for digital theses. You will be required to submit a hardbound copy and also a digital thesis. If you have any questions about copyright after reading these two web pages, please use the email address again that's highlighted in this slide. That the Office of Scholarly Communication are there to help and support you, and they really do know their stuff. I'd like to move on to acknowledging progress. A colleague of mine, Laura, when we were talking about writing our thesis, made a very valid point. Some days you might just write 2 words, and other days you might write 2,000, but nonetheless, each of those days are productive. So how do we acknowledge progress? What does progress mean to us? Well, progress means getting a result, whether it's good or bad. Progress means being able to explain those results. Progress means feeling confident in your research. Progress means completing a certain amount of work. So completing your experiments, that's progress. Progress means learning new skills, and you have learnt a lot of skills when you have been in the lab generating your beautiful data. You are going to learn an awful lot of new skills when you're writing your thesis. And progress means getting a better understanding of what's going on in the literature. You may find that when you're doing your literature review to construct your introduction, that you start to really understand the literature and how your work is going to fit into that. And again, that is completely normal. Your work is enough. Your work is enough when your arguments and conclusions are plausible. The data is the data. That's an old friend of mine used to say when I was a postdoc. You've made a recognisable contribution to knowledge, i.e. you've ticked what the definition of what a PhD is, and you've achieved some or all of the aims that you set out to achieve right back at the start of your PhD. So these are things to look at and to consider, perhaps when you're having a day where you've perhaps only written 1 word. Okay, that's still progress, but by looking at what progress means, is my work enough? Being able to answer these questions is going to allow you to acknowledge your progress, feel more confident and move forward. It's really important to take breaks. Katie was a PhD student that I did my PhD with, and she had this down. She had this down to a T when it came to taking breaks, and this is something she wanted to share with you. And I think it's really important that I do. When writing, make sure that you give yourself regular breaks. It will refresh you. It will give your brain a short break, and it will help you to become more productive. And it really does. It really does. When I was writing my thesis, my partner at the time packed a bag and took me to Barry Island. Okay, I hated him for it, and I was really naggy the entire way from Oxford to Barry Island, but that worked really well because it gave me a break, and it meant I went back to my work feeling all refreshed. And I'd also been on the Gavin and Stacey tour, so that was happy days as well. Right, going forward, what do you need to check with your supervisor? Are there things that you still need to have conversations with about making your plans in order to get your thesis written? Write a list and organise a time to have that conversation with your supervisor. When are you going to start writing your thesis if you haven't already? Put a date down. Be brave. Be brave, people. Who are you going to ask for help when it comes to reviewing? In order to help you write, what must you do? And when you get stuck, what do you need to tell yourself in order to keep yourself going? So think of something positive. We're at the end of this presentation. I really hope that you found it useful. I want to wish you all the luck in the world for writing your thesis. And before I go, I just want to share with you a couple more pearls of wisdom from my friends. Okay? Louise says, any changes that you make, save as a separate document, as you never know if you might need to go back to an earlier draft. Angela says, allow yourself time and money for printing and binding. Make regular backups. Leave summaries, intros, formatting until the end. If you have an idea before bed, write it down so it doesn't interrupt your sleep. And Matt Castle says, it doesn't need to be good or innovative, it just needs to be done. With that, thank you very much. I wish you all the best. If you have any questions or you would like to arrange a video one-to-one, please feel free to email me. My email address is sb2251@cam.ac.uk. That's sugarbravo2251@cam.ac.uk. Take care. Bye bye.